بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والتين والزيتون وطور سينين وهذا البلد الأمين لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فلهم أجر غير ممنون فما يكذبك بعد بالدين أليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Tafseer of Surat At-Tiin, the fiqh, chapter 95 of the Quran. According to the majority of the scholars, this is a Makki surah. Some scholars were of the view that it was revealed in Medina, but otherwise we'll go for the assumption that all of it was revealed in Mecca, inshallah ta'ala. In relation to the previous surahs, we can say that Surat At-Tiin is a conclusion to the last few surahs, in particular Surat Al-Shams, Duha, Al-Layl and Al-Sharh. Okay, last 3 or 4 surahs. It's a mutammima, a conclusion, a concluding remark regarding those surahs. Now we know from the study of the previous surahs, in the previous surahs, one of the major themes of the previous surahs is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning the favors that He has bestowed upon man, and in particular the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. These favors that essentially make man a righteous person. And obviously in the last surah, we focus on the personality and the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how this revelation, the impact it had on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In this surah, we see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the major ayahs of this surah, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, that verily we have made man in the best of ways, the best stature, the finest way. So in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds mankind that He hasn't just favored the believers and He hasn't just favored the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but in fact He has favored all of mankind. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ, we have created al-insan, the human being, in the best of ways. And so we can see the connection there. Likewise, if you look at the ending of Surat Al-Inshirah, of Surat Al-Sharh, the last surah that we looked at, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concluded the previous surah with a command that people engage in the worshipping of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ وَإِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَارْغَبْ. That when you finish from your ibadah, then engage in more ibadah. We mentioned that last week. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishes in this verse that He has created man in the best way, indicating that he is qualified and he is prepared. He is muhayya, and he's been prepared in a way and fashioned in a way that he can fulfill the command of the previous ayah, or the last ayah of Surah Al-Inshirah. And if you remember last week, we spoke about how an interesting thing that we learned from the last few ayahs from Surah Al-Inshirah is that usually when people finish an act of ibadah, they become tired and they want to rest, etc. But the ayah actually tells them to engage further in acts of worship. A person might think, how can that be possible? After you finish your ibadah, you become tired, you become weak. But Allah reminds us in this surah that look, we have created man in the best of ways. So he is capable of fulfilling these acts of ibadah. He is capable of perfecting his character. He is capable of achieving great things by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the virtue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you remember, we said last week, just due to our weaknesses sometimes we fail to realize that. Okay, so for example, we said, if you invite someone, a brother, let's go out, let's have something to eat. You find everyone responding, they'll come. Let's go out, let's do this. Everyone will respond to come. But when it comes to ilm or ibadah, everyone is very quick to make excuses. Very, very quick to make excuses. And the excuses they usually give is, well, I'm tired, this has happened, and what have you, need to rest. But when it comes to other matters, they're quick to, engage in those activities. So Allah has created man in the best of ways so that he is able really to engage in many, many acts of ibadah. And that's why if you look to the Salaf and the stories of the Salaf, you find that they used to engage in a high level of ibadah that you would think is not humanly possible. You think it's not humanly possible. Like Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he used to read the Quran twice a day, every day in Ramadan. And we struggle to read it once, to do one khatma in Ramadan. He used to do it twice a day, every day in Ramadan. Okay? The Prophet ﷺ used to perform ibadah for most of the night. So it's possible. Allah has given us that strength. He has created us in the most amazing way for us to be able to fulfill these acts of ibadah. So we can see the connection there between this surah and the previous surah. Ibn Ashur, when speaking about this surah, he takes a slightly different perspective with regards to the key ayah in this surah, which is, as we mentioned, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We have created man in the best of ways. He said, احتوت هذه السورة على التنبيه بأن الله خلق الإنسان على الفطرة المستقيمة. That this surah, one of the main things it points to or alludes to is that Allah has created man upon this fitra mustaqima, this sound natural disposition, this fitra. ليعلموا أن الإسلام هو الفطرة. To teach people and for that people know that Islam is the fitra, meaning that this ayah لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم, we have created man in the best way, i.e. we have created man upon fitra, which as a concept is absolutely fine. But whether this is what exactly the verse means, and it's problematic. But I'm mentioning it here at the beginning because I believe his tafsir is very, very interesting and there's a lot we can learn from it, even though it's not the predominant view, and maybe even though it will be the view that we don't end up adopting. But let us just mention it. كما قال as Allah says in other places in the Quran, فأقم وجهك للدين حنيفا فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله. That establish your face for the deen, Hanifa, as someone who worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. This is the fitrah of Allah which He created man upon. وأن ما يخالف أصوله بالأصالة أو بالتحريف فساد وضلال ومتبعي ما يخالف الإسلام أهل الضلالة. That therefore anyone who goes against the way that Allah created man, we said Allah created man in the best ways, meaning if Allah created man with this natural disposition to recognize the oneness of Allah, therefore whoever follows a religion other than Islam has essentially corrupted this fitrah, which as we said as a concept is absolutely fine. So this is a general connection between this surah and the previous surahs. Let's start now with the ayat, inshallah. So the surah begins with a qasam, like many of the previous surahs as well. So the first qasam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes, this is the first verse, وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونِ. وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونِ. So Allah, He swears by the teen, the fig. We all know what figs are, the fruit. Yeah. وَالزَّيْتُونِ, and the olive. So He swears by these two food. وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونِ, by the fig and the olive. Now the fig here, what is meant by the fig is the actual fig that we eat. That's why in books of Tafseer it mentions that it is تِينُكُمْ الَّذِي تَأْكُلُونَ. It is the teen that you eat, and it's the zaytun that you ta'sirun. It's the olives that you squeeze in order to make olive oil. Okay, so there's no hidden meaning here. Allah is actually swearing by the teen and He is swearing by the zaytun. Why do we mention this? Because we find in some books of tafsir they say that the teen refers to the masjid of Dimashq, and az-zaytun it refers to the Masjid al-Aqsa. Okay, So some scholars were of that view. Some said it was the masjid of Nuh alayhi salam, and some said Az-Zaytun was the masjid of the Ashab al-Kahf, the people of the cave. So some books of tafsir mention that, but you find most of them do not mention strong asanid or chains of narration for that. Okay? Now, in order to understand the significance of these two qasams, Allah is swearing, and we've mentioned before previously in many surahs, that when Allah makes a qasam, He makes a qasam by something which is very amazing. He swears by something which points to the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have to reflect upon this point and see where does the greatness lie in these two particular foods that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned. But before we do that, if we look further and look at the other qasams that Allah makes, we see a relationship. So in the first ayah, At-Tiin وَالزَّيْتُونَ وَطُورِ سِينِينَ وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ. وَطُورِ سِينِينَ, and the Mount of Sinai, and He swears by the Mount of Sinai, وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ, and this safe sanctuary or this safe town. Okay, so He swears by two foods and then He swears by two places. So what is the connection between that? So some scholars said that by swearing by these two types of food, He's actually swearing by the places that they usually grow in. He's swearing by the places that they usually grow in. And At-Tiin and Zaytun are commonly found to, you'll find them to grow in Ash-Sham, and in particular Bayt al-Maqdis, in particular in Jerusalem. Okay, where Bayt al-Maqdis is. And as we know, this was a place, Jerusalem and Ash-Sham, where many of the prophets of Allah, they came from. The prophets of Bani Israel, and in particular, the most famous of them all, Isa alayhi salam. And then he swore by وَطُورِ سِينِينَ, and the Mount of Tur, or the Mount of Sinin. Sinin, another way of saying Sinai, or Sinai. Sinai, as we say. This is the mountain where Allah spoke to who? Musa alayhi salam. وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ, and this safe town. What is this safe town? Where is it referred to? Mecca, by agreement of the scholars. So these three places, they are all sacred places. And not just that they are sacred, but they are referring to the places of three sacred places for three different religions. Okay, so we have At-Tiin وَالزَّيْتُونَ. As we said, it refers to Bani Israel. This is where Isa alayhi salam came from. وَطُورِ سِينِينَ. This is for Musa alayhi salam. And as we know, Musa alayhi salam is one of the major prophets for the Jews. وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ. Okay. And that's why, subhanAllah, we find that even in the Torah, we find that these three places have been mentioned in this particular order towards the end of the Torah. But they refer to as, in the old scriptures, when they were translated into Arabic, it was referred to as Faran, Al-Faran, Faran, which referred to a mountainous region in the Hijaz. Okay, referred to a mountainous region in the Hijaz. So even in the Subhanallah, in the Torah, there is a mention of a place, they call it in English Paran, P-A-R-A-N. Some translate it as Faran, F-A-R-A-N. And if you look in the old, even pre-Islamic books on the history and the demographics of the Arabian Peninsula, there was a place called Faran. And Faran was that mountainous region in Mecca. And even according to old biblical texts as well, they say that this is the place where Ibrahim alayhi salam and Hajar resided in. So there can be no denial, subhanallah, there can be no denial that even in the biblical text there is mention of Mecca. There is mention of Mecca, and there are other places as well. There are other places as well in the biblical text that suggest that refer to the sacredness of this place. And it's not just because of the fact that Ibrahim alayhi salam went there, because also biblical texts actually say that there is a prophet that will come from this region as well. Okay, so obviously Ibrahim alayhi salam came well before all of that. Okay? So we can say that this qasam that Allah is making at the beginning of the surah, its significance lies in the fact that it refers to the place of where these two common things grow, or where these two things commonly grow. Okay, so At-Tiin and the Zaytun. Other scholars, they said, if you look maybe to the earlier books of Tafseer, they don't really mention that much that it's to do with the place where they grow. Rather, it's to do with the fruits themselves, or the teen and the zaytun themselves. And they mentioned that there are a number of benefits of the teen and the zaytun, the fig and the olive, which indicate why maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a qasam by them. So for example, it's mentioned in a hadith that once the Prophet ﷺ was given like a basket of teen, of figs, and he was said to the Prophet, eat, and so he ate from it. And then he said, لو قلت إن فاكهة نزلت من الجنة لقلت هذه لأنها فاكهة الجنة بلا عجم فكلوها فإنها تقطع البواسير وتنفع من النقرس. He said, after the Prophet ate from the fig, he said, if I was to ever say that a fruit from paradise descended down, then verily I would say it would be this fruit, referring to the fig. Why? Because the fruits of paradise do not have any pips. They don't have any big seeds or pips inside of them, and figs don't. فَكُلُوهَا, so eat it, for indeed it تَقْطَعُ الْبَوَاسِير, يعني it stops hemorrhoids. وَتَنْفَعُ مِنَ النِّقْرِس. The niqris is a type of arthritis you usually get in your feet, gout. Yeah. So and this hadith is mentioned, or this narration is mentioned in the books of tafsir like Al-Qurtubi and other books, but in terms of its isnad, some scholars did dispute its authenticity. But without, even then, many of the scholars that were specialists in medicine, they actually said that fig has a number of benefits, and even if you look today, the studies of fig today show that it's very nutritional, very beneficial for the human being, for the human body. So we can say from a Shari'i perspective, and it is good, especially if we say that this is authentic narration, that we should make it a part of our diets to eat fig, especially that Allah makes a qasam by it. Okay, and I don't think it's that common for us to eat figs in this country. Maybe in the Arab world it is, but maybe not here, maybe because of the price, I don't know, but it's not usually something which is that common. So try and make it a habit, inshallah. As for zaytun, then without a shadow of a doubt, zaytun is something which has been spoken about many times in the Quran. Probably the most famous ayah that speaks about the zaytun is what? The ayah of Ayatul Nur, the verse of the of light. Okay, Surat An-Nur. And this obviously is an ayah which we can speak at great length about, but inshallah refer to it, inshallah, in your research. Try and read about it because it's a beautiful verse and a number of benefits you can take from it. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kulu zayt waddahinu bihi fa-innahu min shajaratin mubarakah." The Prophet said, "Consume zayt, the zaytun, and oil yourselves with it, for indeed it comes from a blessed tree. It comes from a blessed tree. Shajaratun mubarakah." And this authentic narration found in the Shama'il of Imam At-Tirmidhi. So At-Tiin wa Zaytun. So therefore we can say this qasam is significant for two reasons. Number one, because of the fig and the olive themselves and the benefit behind them, and that they give nutrition, it gives good health. It's used for for medical purposes. It's used for cosmetic purposes as well. Okay, so it has many benefits to it. Okay, which make us reflect. How can something, food like this or products like this just come out of nowhere? Surely there was a designer, someone who created these particular things, and it contains so much benefit for mankind. So it should make us reflect upon that point. وَطُورِ سِينِينَ, and by the Mount of Sinin. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has moved to making a qasam by mentioning places now. وَطُورِ سِينِينَ, so we mentioned, now the word Tur itself, Tur is another way of saying Jabal in the Arabic language. Some say that Tur was the language of is a way to say Arabic in the language of the Nubians, and then it was later Arabized. And so in essence it refers to a mountain. وَطُورِ سِينِينَ, and as we said, Sinin is another word of saying Sayna or Sina, which is Sinai, as we say in English. This is a place, as we mentioned, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He spoke to Musa alayhi salam. And in the third verse, وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ, and by this safe town, al-balad al-amin, this safe town. Why is it safe? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe it as being safe? Because as we know, fighting in the sacred land was always something which was considered to be prohibited. The Prophet forbade trees from being taken out and uprooted in it. So it's a very, very safe place, safe town. And subhanAllah, if you look at Mecca, and generally speaking in the Arabian Peninsula, you'll find that the Arabian Peninsula is probably one of the very few places, if not the only place, that was not invaded by foreign occupier. Okay? It was never invaded by foreign occupier. If you look at all the other parts around the world, you find they were occupied by foreign forces and occupations. Most countries in the world. I mean, even today in England, we think that the indigenous population, they're white, but they think people like the EDL, that they like to think that they all come from England, but in actuality they come from Scandinavia and other parts of Europe. They've been conquered many times. But Mecca in particular has never been conquered. And that really, subhanAllah, it's a wisdom. Maybe we can say one of the wisdoms why the Quran was sent down to the people of Mecca. Because with occupation comes and the occupier usually introduces foreign ideologies and concepts and civilizations that usually mix with the people and sometimes can corrupt their ideologies and the concepts that they adopt. So the Arabs are very pure in that sense. Very, very pure. They weren't corrupted by foreign ideologies, even though they had shirk. Yes, without a shadow of a doubt, they had shirk. But remember that when it comes to civilizations are not just built upon the thoughts that they adopt, but also their thinking processes as well. Okay? Their thinking processes. And for you to really appreciate that, I think if you had lived in another country, okay, to see what defines a country is not just the ideas that they carry, but the way they think. I mean, after living in Egypt for some time, I've realized this point, subhanAllah. People in Egypt, for example, think completely different to people from other countries. Every country has its own unique, way of thinking. And Egypt as a country has been, subhanAllah, it's been colonized and been invaded, and it's always at the crossroads for all civilizations. Anyhow, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by Balad al-Amin due to the fact that one of the wisdoms behind that is because this is a place where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down the Quran and the final message. Okay, and after making this qasam now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives the Jawab al-Qasam. He gives the Jawab al-Qasam. As we know, every time you swear by something, you have to mention something significant. You don't just say, I swear by Allah, and then you keep quiet. You have to have a jawab by that, a response to that. By Allah. You don't just say by Allah, and then you keep quiet. You mention a jawab. So what is the jawab? Allah has made this amazing qasam, and the jawab is mentioned in verse 4, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We have made and created man in the finest state. We have created man in the finest state. Now, usually when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a qasam, the jawab al-qasam is usually something which is disputed, isn't it? The jawab al-qasam is usually something in the Quran which is disputed by the people. So the jawab al-qasam could be, for example, about the ba'ath, the resurrection. Or the jawab al-qasam could be, for example, about the fact that the revelation is true, or that the messenger is true. These are the contentious issues that people debated about at that time. However, did people ever debate or reject the fact that we were created in this amazing manner? That is to say, were there any people that said, the human being, he is not that great, or he's not that significant, there are other creations that are greater than the human being? No. Generally throughout time, even amongst the disbelievers, you will find that they were the most amazed with regards to mentally, rationally, in terms of his intelligence. A human being, without a shadow of a doubt, has been made in the finest of ways. So was there really a need to make a qasam? Was there really a need to make a qasam for this reality, which everyone really believes in? To answer this, as Imam Shanqiti rahimahullah, he mentioned that sometimes people, they make a qasam, Ibn Ashur, he mentioned that sometimes people, they might accept a reality, but they do not accept the consequences of that reality. So they might accept the fact that, look, we have been created in the most amazing way, but they won't accept the consequences of that, which is what? If we realize that this human being has been created in this most amazing way, then surely that points to what? A creator, a designer. So this is what the ayah is really trying to say. Look, we have created man in the most amazing way. The finest of ways. There's nothing greater in that sense than the human being in terms of Allah's creation. Therefore, this should make you lead to believe in a creator, in a designer, in a khaliq, in a musawwir, in a fatir, in a bari, in all these names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the reality is you do not. You do not accept his authority and the fact that he should be worshipped alone. Imam al-Qurtubi actually mentioned a funny story about this ayah. He mentioned that this was an old story, that there was once a man who was in love with his wife, crazily in love with his wife. So he said to his wife, he said, I will divorce you, if the moon ends up if the moon is more beautiful than you. If the moon is more beautiful than you, I'll divorce you 3 times. What is he trying to say? He's trying to say there's nothing more beautiful than you. There's nothing, and if there was anything more beautiful than you, I would divorce you. And so his wife got shocked and he said, no, you've divorced me because the moon is more beautiful than me. You've divorced me. And so he went to sleep that night and he was stressed out and he didn't know what to do, and he woke up in the morning and he went to a group of scholars. And they said, look, I made this qasam, I made this oath that, if the moon is more beautiful than my wife, I'll divorce her. And all the ulama there, they said, the moon is more beautiful than any woman. So, she's divorced. You've divorced her. All of them said that apart from one imam, one scholar. He was from the Ahnaf, from the Hanafi school of thought. So they turned around to him and said, we noticed you were quiet. You didn't say anything. And he said, no, he didn't divorce her. And they said, why? And then he recited the verse, لَقَدْ خَلَقَنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We have created man in the best way, finest way. There's nothing better than the creation of man. There can be nothing more beautiful and more amazing than the creation of man himself. And then they all agreed and they said, in that case, you have not divorced your wife. You have not divorced your wife. So anyhow, this should be a point of reflection for us, that this ayah should encourage man to reflect upon his creation. Reflect at the way he was made by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it be his mouth, his eyes, his ears, his hands, his feet. Everything, subhanallah, points to the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a very good book in English which I would encourage all of you to read, called Man and the Universe. It's selected translations from Ibn Qayyim's book Miftah Dar al-Sa'ada, and again it's called Man and the Universe, I think, published by Dar al-Salam. Very beneficial book, which just speaks about the human body, the anatomy of the human body, from an Islamic perspective and from a Quranic and Hadith perspective, which makes you reflect upon the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ability to create. So لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. Now most scholars interpret this to refer to the physical creation of man, as we mentioned. But what did Ibn Ashur say? What did we say he said? It refers to the fitrah. It refers to the fitrah. this natural disposition. That is what makes a human being distinguished from everything else really. It's the fitrah. Why? Because he said, look at the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Inna Allah la yanzuru. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Inna Allah la yanzuru ila ajsadikum wa la surikum walakin yanzuru ila qulubikum wa a'malikum. Allah, He doesn't look to your physical forms. He doesn't look to your body. But He looks to your heart and He looks to your actions. Meaning the key thing is what? The inside. Yeah? That's what really distinguishes man and what makes man unique. Okay? That's what makes man unique. So it's really to do with the fitrah and not the actual khilqah. This was the view of Ibn Ashur. And he also said, if we say it's to do with the physical creation of man, what's the point of that qasam? And this is a very interesting point he makes. He said, look, what is the connection between the qasams that Allah made and this ayah? Reflect. And we mentioned before, every time Allah makes a qasam, there's a unique relationship between that qasam and the jawab of the qasam, the response of the qasam. So he said, look, the previous things that Allah made an oath by, they're essentially referring to prophethood and their messages. And the prophethood, the previous prophethood and messages, they refer to islah, rectification of man. It's not really about the physical creation of the city, the sacred city or the safe city and the Mount of Sinai and the fig and the olive. It's to do with the fact that they are sacred things that refer to reform. They refer to reform. They're indicative of reform. And you might think, what's that? How is reform connected to the fig and the olive? Because they say the olive is something which is very, very pure. Okay, zayt of zaytun, the oil of zaytun is something which is very, very pure. And it's used in the Quran to refer to igniting the fire of fitrah in a person's heart. If you refer to Ayatul Nur. So Ibn Ashur said, if you say that this ayah, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانِ refers to the khilqah, refers to the physical creation of man, then it doesn't really make sense with regards to the qasam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made. And especially considering the next ayah. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدَنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Then we made him to the lowest of the lows. How can that be? Allah created the human being and he will die in that state. Lowest of the low, you would think refers to what? What would you think it refers to? Physical form, or does it refer to the spiritual state of man? What would you say? I mean, we're going to answer this. Don't worry, you're not going to end up walking away with that answer. So,
Iman.
It refers to Iman, okay? This is how Ibn Ashur sees it. ثُمَّ رَدَدَنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Then we made him the lowest of the lows. Meaning he ended up, corrupting his fitrah, and therefore he led himself to the hellfire. Okay, so this is the way how Ibn Ashur refers to it. And that's why he said, فَالْمَرْضِيُّ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ هُوَ التَّقْوِيمُ وَإِدْرَاكِ الْإِنسَانِ وَنَظَرِهِ الْعَقْلِي. So therefore, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really appreciates the taqweem of, taqweem means to make something really fine and upright and strong and steadfast. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ, in the best of taqweem, in the best of ways. What does Allah really appreciate from man? His physical appearance or his internal and spiritual appearance? It's that internal and spiritual appearance and the steadfastness of his spiritual state. However, even though Ibn Ashur said this, and I found it to be quite fascinating, I have to say it goes against the majority of what most of Mufassirin have said. And that's why you really have to be careful. If you read Tafseer Ibn Ashur, okay, you will recognize and realize that at times, okay, he does go against the majority of Mufassirin. At times. Okay? And that's why you have to be careful. And although I know I refer to Ibn Ashur a lot in these classes, I don't want people to therefore think that everything he says is sound. I mean, you won't find any book of Tafsir which is completely sound. But at times he can, completely, come out with something new. Okay? So just be wary of that. Why do I mention this? Because majority of the Mufassirin, when they said لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, they said it refers to his khilqah, his physical created state, as we mentioned. ثُمَّ رَدَدَنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ, then we made him to be the lowest of the lows. Okay, this refers to physical creation as well. How do we make him to be the lowest of the low? How do we make? By sending him back to أَرْذَلِ الْعُمَرِ. أَرْذَلِ الْعُمَرِ is a term which is referred to in the Quran in a number of places. It refers to this old and feeble age, when a person becomes senile. They can't think straight. They can't physically do what they used to do in the past. Okay, and if we look at many places in the Quran, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions Allahu alladhi khalaqakum min du'fin thumma ja'ala min ba'di du'fin quwwa. Okay, in another qira'ah which is in Hafs as well, Allahu alladhi khalaqakum min du'fin. Okay, in Hafs and Asim, one of the unique things about this ayah, you can recite it in both ways and they're equally considered to be the same. Okay, Allahu alladhi khalaqakum min du'fin, or you can recite Allahu alladhi khalaqakum min du'fin in Surat Al-Rum. So Allah is the one who created you from weakness. Then He made from you when you were young. Then He made from after your weakness quwwa, made you strong, physically strong. And after He making you physically strong, He made you weak again and grow white hair, etc. وَمِنْكُمْ مَنْ يُرَدُّ إِلَىٰ أَرْذَلِ الْعُمَرِ, Allah says, and from amongst you are those who return back to this old and feeble age. لِكَيْ لَا يَعْلَمَ مِنْ بَعْدِ عِلْمٍ شَيْئًا. That after knowing everything that you knew in this life, you would then know nothing. And so we go through this process. We are created, as children, we don't know much, we're very weak, physically weak, then we grow, we become very, very strong, we reach a peak, and then we become very weak again. And sometimes we suffer from, we become senile, and that's why one of the du'as, the Prophet ﷺ, he used to seek refuge from old age, min al-kibar, su'il kibar. He used to seek refuge in su'il kibar, from the evilness of old age, meaning the bad things that happen to you when you usually become old, such as you lose your memory, you suffer from Alzheimer's and so many other illnesses that affect the brain, such as Parkinson's disease, so many. Okay? So ثُمَّ رَدَدَنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Now, why mention this? What's the significance of mentioning this? So he establishes, like in the previous surah, that he's bestowed many favors upon man. And likewise in this surah, he bestowed this great favor of making us in the most amazing way. But then we go old, we become feeble, and then we pass away and we die. This is in order to remind man about his fate, and not to become overwhelmed with his current physical strength. And that's how many people live in this life. They reach the peak in their life and they think, this is how I'm going to live for the rest of my life. But they fail to realize and remind themselves that eventually they'll become old. Eventually they'll become weak. Eventually they'll stop being able to do many good deeds. And then they'll just perish and they'll die. كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته ثم يهيج فتراه مصفرا ثم يكون حطاما. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, the example of life is like what? كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته. It's like the analogy of rain. It falls upon the ground and plants grow forth. And it amazes the farmers and those who place the seeds therein. ثم يكون مصفرا, and then it becomes yellowish and brownish and it becomes very dry. ثم يكون حطاما, and then it will crumble into dust. If you look at the stages of life of a flower or a plant, that's exactly how we as human beings are. We are young, we're like a sprout, we're very small, then we grow, our flowers, grow and we become beautiful, and then we become weak and feeble and old, and then we're turned into dust. And subhanAllah, there is a fascinating narration of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, which really shows this reality, that this is a reality that affects everyone. That many of us will be affected by this Ardh al-Umar, except for those who are protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says in this narration, Man qara al-Quran لا يرد إلى أرذل العمر. Whoever reads the Quran, another riwayah, من جمع القرآن, whoever memorizes the Quran, فلا يرد إلى أرذل العمر. He will not be returned to this old and feeble age. He will not return to it. And that's why he says, وَذَلِكَ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى, and that is based upon the ayah, ثُمَّ رَدَدَنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. That we then will return him to the lowest of the lows, except for those who do believe and do good deeds. أي إِلَّا الَّذِينَ قَرَأُوا الْقُرْآنِ. That's how he interpreted. Except for those who read the Quran. Except for those who read the Quran. Those who read the Quran, those who devote their lives to the Quran, they will not suffer from this Aruthalil Umar, this old and feeble age, and the things that are associated with it. And that's why you find, subhanAllah, if you reflect upon the seerah of the scholars and of the righteous people, you'll find that there are people, up until the day they die, subhanAllah, there are people who are engaged in ibadah, there are people that are engaged in talab al-ilm or in teaching, etc. And subhanAllah, if you look, on Facebook, I post something about Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah. A man who died at the age of, I think about 80, or 75 or 80. He was teaching right up until the very last days of his life. And he was teaching, not easy things. People professors that would struggle to prepare for, for their classes in this day and age. Right up until there, he died, subhanAllah. And he was said that even when he was on his deathbed, he was speaking masail of ilm, fiqhi issues, and he was mentioning them on his deathbed. And subhanAllah, and it was as if he was in a class. And his son was saying this, narrating this. If you look at his biography, it was as if he was speaking to a class. And he said, what is the answer for this? What is the answer for that? And then you mentioned the masail. Subhanallah, look at that. And one of the reasons in particular, Quran, because obviously for a person who jama' al-Quran, a person who memorizes the Quran, it's not an easy thing. It takes many years, a lot of devotion, a lot of practice. And so the person is always training his mind. And that's why you find people who are huffaz, subhanallah, they have the sharpest of minds. People who know the Quran very, very well. Their memory, their minds are amazing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserves their minds through the Quran. That's from the barakah of the Quran. Now I remember, subhanallah, when I used to recite to my Quran teacher in Egypt, he's someone he's got ijazas in the 10 qira'at, and one of the shortest asanid in the whole world in qira'at. And amazing man, subhanallah. Whenever I used to recite Quran, usually you recite to your Quran teacher, you tell them, okay, I'm going to recite from this surah or from this page. You don't have to do that with him. Okay? He would have classes from Fajr all the way up until like 11 o'clock p.m. every day. So you have students like non-stop. So you can imagine, I'm coming in, I just begin to recite. I don't have to tell him where I am. One day I was reciting from a particular surah. Subhanallah. I just mentioned the first 2 words of that ayah and he stopped me straight away. And he said, no, that comes in the middle of the ayah, not from the beginning. So I swapped it around basically. Just 2 words, that's all I said. Imagine that. 2 words. That actually came from these 2 words, they're in the middle of the ayah, not at the beginning. And he stopped me straight away. And you can't imagine, subhanAllah, what this Quran, wallahi, it can do to you. How it can bless you, you'll bless your life and even your physical health as well. And likewise, that's the positive things of good deeds as well. As we mentioned before in the hadith classes, when we study the hadith, احفظ الله يحفظك, that preserve the boundaries of Allah and Allah will preserve you. And we mentioned the very famous story of Abu Tayyib al-Tabari, rahimahullah. He was 100 years old and he jumped over a hole, and his students turned around to him and they said, Ya Shaykh, what are you doing? You should walk around it. No, you're 100 years old and you're jumping over a hole. And he said, Ya, la. هذه الجوارح حفظناها في الصغر من المعاصي فحفظها الله في الكبر. That these limbs of ours, we preserved them from sin when we were young, and so Allah preserved these limbs of ours when we became old. So look at the barakah and the blessings of knowledge, and the Quran, it even has a physical effect upon the person. So, ثُمَّ رَدَدَنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Now here, this is where maybe some ishkal could arise إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. In verse 6, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. Except for those who believe and do good deeds, for them they will have an unfailing and uninterrupted reward. Except for those who believe and do good deeds. Now, Ibn Ashur, he says, look, this proves my theory. Okay, this proves my theory that it's not to do with the physical state, it's to do with the internal state. Why? Because he said, okay, we create, if we imagine this, okay, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ refers to the physical state, yeah? ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Then we made him to the lowest of the lows. Except those who believe and do righteous deeds. What does this except mean? What's the consequences of this إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا? So if we say إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, except for those who believe and do righteous deeds, this means that they will not go to the lowest of the low physically. Is that an absolute rule though? We say no, because look, there are many old people that suffer. Most people, when they become old, they become physically weak, they forget things. Everyone practically suffers from that, except for the very few that Allah blesses. Okay, except for very, very few. So surely, if you look at the context, he says, no, this is referring to إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. They will have an eternal, unending reward, indicating that it's all to do with the internal state. Allah created the man upon fitrah, natural disposition, to recognize the oneness of Allah. Then we made him to the lowest of the lows, meaning he corrupted himself, his fitrah, by sin and transgression and pride and arrogance. So he became the lowest of the low. Except for those who believe and do righteous deeds. It makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. Replying to this though, we can reply to this and we say the following. Number one, and we mentioned this a few times, let's see those who are sharp amongst us. When we see illa in the Quran, we said illa can have there are two types of illa. Can anyone remember them? Huh? No. No. Yes, who said that? Okay. Connected and disconnected. So you have illa which is muttasil and illa which is munqati'. Okay. Illa which is muttasil, meaning the thing that you are exempting, okay, or the thing that you are making exception from, okay, is being exempted from the previous statement. Yeah. So for example, if I said all of the students got up apart from Zayd. قام الطلاب إلا زيد. All of the students got up except Zayd. إلا زيد. Okay? إلا زيدا. Yeah? قام الطلاب إلا زيدا. Here, Zayd, is he from the Tullab? Students, sorry. Tullab is students, yeah? Yes, he's from the students. So he is muttasil, connected. Yeah? Or if I said, قَامَ الطُّلَّابُ إِلَّا الْكَلْبِ, the students stood up apart from the dog. So is the dog from the Tullab? No, he's not. It's a completely different issue. Meaning, apart from the dog as well, the dog didn't stand up. But he is not from the students. That's munqati'. That's completely separated. Severed. So we can say, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. We can say here, this illa, it's the illa munqati'. Which therefore means lakin. Illa munqati' in the Quran usually conveys a meaning lakin. However, that is to say therefore, okay, and this is the correct way of looking at it, insha'Allah. لَقَدْ خَلَقَنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We have made man in the best and the finest way in terms of physical creation. Then we made him to the lowest of the low in terms of physical creation. However, those who believe and do righteous deeds, then they will have a reward which is uninterrupted. Okay? That's where we can look at it. Or we can say, no, this illa is muttasil. It is connected to the previous statement. But there is another interpretation for ثُمَّ رَدَدَنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ, which is that it refers to Jahannam. We've made him to the lowest of the lows, meaning we have placed him in Jahannam. Okay? Because Jahannam is the lowest place, as we know. The lowest place. So therefore, this is muttasil. Therefore, we can interpret to mean we have put them in the lowest of the low, i.e. in hellfire, except those who believe and do righteous deeds. However, we can also say, okay, and this will be the final, we can say it is muttasil. We can say it is muttasil, is connected, this illa is connected, even if we say that the verse about لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ, it refers to the physical state. Except those who believe and do righteous deeds. Meaning, Allah has created man in this amazing physical way. He's given him this physical stature in the finest way, and He made him to the lowest of the low, أَرْذَلِ الْعُمَرِ, except those who believe and do righteous deeds. Then for them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will preserve them and protect them. Allah will preserve them and protect them physically. And we've mentioned this already. We've given that the athar, that narration of Ibn Abbas, who said, "Man qara al-Quran, fala yuraddu ila ardhil al-umar." And likewise, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, rahimahullah, from the Tabi'een, he said, إِذَا بَلَغَ الْمُؤْمِنُ مِنَ الْكِبَرِ مَا يَعْجِزُ عَنِ الْعَمَلِ كُتِبَ لَهُ مَا كَانَ يَعْمَلُ وَهُوَ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, he said, if a believer, he reaches an old age, he reaches his kibar, he reaches an old age, and he is incapable of doing the good deeds that he used to do when he was young, then the good deeds that he used to do when he was young will also be written for him when he became old. And this is the meaning of the ayah, فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. Then they will have an uninterrupted reward. Okay? So, this means, therefore, that Allah has created us in the finest of ways, but we will become old, we will become senile, many of us, and we will become physically weak, except those who believe and do righteous deeds. For some of them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless them with physical strength, and their mind will be just as fresh as it was when they were young, until the day they die. Or they will become old, but their reward will continue to go on, because of what they used to do when they were young. And this is the very important lesson we learn from this, is don't procrastinate in doing good deeds. Don't say, when I become old, okay, when I become old, that's when I'll do my good deeds. Because if you have that attitude and you reach your old age and you haven't done your good deeds when you were young, you're not going to have those good rewards written for you. You're not going to have those good rewards written for you. So this idea, I'll become good when I'm old, it's a false statement. It's a whisper of shaitan, okay, and it only distances you from achieving good in this life and the hereafter. So فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ. And we learn, subhanAllah, a beautiful benefit from this about the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will reward you with more than what you actually deserve. And that's from the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He will reward you something more than you actually deserve. So even when you reach an old age, your rewards will continue to go on. Your rewards will continue to go on. But you have to be of those who used to worship Allah when you were young and fit and healthy. And likewise, your ajr is غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ fil akhirah as well. Your reward is uninterrupted in the akhirah. Never ever ending. It's never ever ending. So it's from that perspective as well. So we can say it's from two perspectives. Your rewards will continue when you are alive and you're in your old age. And also the reward in the akhirah as well. In terms of the thawab itself, it's uninterrupted as well. So إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. And just remember with this phrase فَلَهُمْ, remember this issue that we mentioned about the nabra, about the emphasis of the letter. It's not فَلَهُمْ, it's فَلَهُمْ. Okay? Otherwise you change the meaning. Then in verse 7, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. What then will make you deny, after all of this, the deen? At-Tiin here is in reference to what? Yawm al-Qiyamah. Okay? Yawm al-Qiyamah. What does deen literally mean other than religion? Not day. Recompense. Okay, we said deen comes from the word dain, and dain means to pay someone back. So your deen, Yawm al-Din. Malik Yawm al-Din. Yeah, the king and the master of the day of recompense, meaning that's the day that you will be paid back. فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. Now why is this ayah mentioned here, all places? Because this is like saying, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling man, we've created you in this most impeccable way, and we're going to make you return to the lowest of the low, which should be a sign for you that you will eventually die. You see people becoming old and senile and then eventually dying. This should be a sign of you to reflect that Allah has the ability to resurrect you. He has the ability to resurrect you. فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ. Therefore, what makes you reject bid-deen? What makes you reject the day of recompense? What makes you reject it? And obviously this is a rhetorical question with the idea of tawbih, with the idea of belittlement and chastisement, and trying to correct the beliefs of the mushrikeen. Some, interestingly, subhanallah, some ulama, some mufassirin actually said that this ayah is directed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Although Mujahid was completely against this idea, he said, how can you say this ayah is directed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. What makes you deny the deen? You find this, actually many mufassirin said this, and they have the asanid to many of the Sahaba. And they said the idea is this, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to have yaqeen in the deen, to have yaqeen in Yawm al-Din, to have absolute certainty. Not that he rejected the deen. Ma'adh Allah, Rasulullah never rejected or denied Yawm al-Din, the day of recompense. But the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is asking this strong rhetorical question to the mushrikeen, to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you should have absolute certainty and there should be no area of doubt whatsoever. Meaning there should be no cause for you to reject the day of recompense, because the signs are so clear and absolutely clear. أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not the most decisive of judges? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not the most decisive of judges? Now when we read this ayah, many of us fail to make the connection between this ayah and what has preceded it. And that's maybe due to the fact that many of us, especially in this contemporary age, have developed a very limited understanding of this phrase of Allah is al-Hakim. Alaysa Allahu bi ahkamil hakimin. Obviously, due to the effects of secularism, many people have excluded Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from playing the role as a judge in terms of deciding for us our ahkam, our rules and regulations. And so obviously we had to, as a Muslim ummah, had to revive the idea of hakimiyyah, that judgment lies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, which is a sound concept in our religion, and anyone who rejects that, it really is rejecting a part of the uluhiyyah and the rububiyyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, when we come across verses like this is the only aspect we think about. Alaysa Allahu bi ahkamil hakimin. We will usually translate this, isn't Allah the best of judges? Okay, isn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the best of judges? I mean, when we think of judges, what do we think of? Halal and haram. Yeah, law, code, etc. But the actual idea of Allah being ahkamil hakimin is far more extensive than that. The idea of it is far more comprehensive. وَلَحُ الْحُكْمُ وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. To Him belongs al-hukm. Now what does hukm mean? What does even ahkama mean? It means to make something clear, to make something distinct. That's why we have a hukm shar'i, or a legal ruling. It's something which is distinct. Allah has made it absolutely clear. That's the linguistic meaning, to make something absolutely clear. So therefore Allah has ihkam. He makes something absolutely clear, absolutely clear in a number of issues. He makes a number of things very, very clear. Number one, His sun', His creation. So Allah is Al-Hakim with regards to the way He creates. Meaning He is decisive in the way He creates. Absolutely clear. He has fashioned us in the most best, He has fashioned us in the most finest of ways, which indicates that He has this clear process of sunnah, of creation. Also in tadbir, in organizing as well. Allah is Al-Hakim in regards to organizing of life's affairs. In terms of qadr, our destiny, in terms of our ajal, in terms of our lifespan. All of these things have been decided. And also in matters of qada and adl. Matters of qada, judgment, and matters of justice. The question here though, how is this connected to the study of this surah at hand? So we have seen Allah's ihkam, or Allah's ability to create things in the finest of ways in the ayah لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We have seen that there. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of judges. So therefore, if He decides to create man in the finest of ways, there is no way on this earth that He will create this man for no reason. He is the best of decide. When He makes a decision, when He passes a hukum, it has a hikmah, a wisdom behind it. And hence the connection between ruling, the word hukum, and hikmah, ruling and wisdom. Because what does wisdom really mean? وَضْعُ الْأَشْيَاءِ فِي مَوْضِعِهَا. To place things in their actual places. Meaning it makes sense. It makes sense. Nothing has been placed in its wrong place. So when Allah, He created the heavens and the earth, when He created us in the best of ways, when He gave us eyes to see, when He gave us ears to hear, when He gave us a tongue to speak with, when He gave us all of these things, it was for a reason. It was for a reason. None of us do things for any haphazard reason. Everything we do consciously, has a reason behind it, a wisdom behind it. And of all those people who make wisdoms and all of those people who make decisions, Allah is the best amongst them. أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمٍ. Meaning, is He not the most decisive and the clearest in the decisions that He makes in life? So if He has made you in the best of ways, أَحْسَنَ تَقْوِيمٍ, what is the reason behind that? What is the reason behind that? And as we mentioned so many times, subhanAllah, the delusion of atheists and those who reject the Creator, they marvel at the creation around them. They marvel at the creation around them, but yet it doesn't direct them to the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He should be worshipped, or that there is a purpose behind this creation. If any human being was to create something, invent a machine, and we were to show it to someone, they will naturally ask, what does it do? What's its purpose? Isn't it? You won't find a human being looking at a piece of technology and marveling at it and think, wow, this thing's amazing, and they don't have any idea what its purpose is. Doesn't happen, does it? And you won't find it amazing until you realize its purpose. But look at the delusion of those who disbelieve. Subhanallah. They know the amazingness of creation, and they even attest to His amazing the fact that it's been created in the most amazing way, yet they don't ask what's the purpose. أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. Do you think that Allah created you in abath? Do you think Allah created you in mere play? وَأَنَّكُمْ إِلَيْنَا لَا تُرْجَعُونَ. And that you will not return unto us. Subhanallah. So, the significance of this ayah is that such that people do not become deluded to think that we will not return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. And maybe one more point that we can mention before we conclude is, especially when it comes to the issue of hakimiyya, we have to be very careful, brothers, that we don't end up sloganeering and turning valid Shari'i principles in our religion into slogans. When we turn things into slogans, sometimes it gives us a very, very narrow mentality with looking at things. Very, very narrow mentality when we look at things. So for example, this issue of hakimiyya. Okay? So we say there is no judgment except to the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is true. But don't look at it in a narrow way. For example, one of the narrow ways of people looking at it, and I've heard this before. Someone decides he doesn't want to go to Jum'ah because he wants to work in his shop. He wants to work in his shop. And so he's given the ruling to himself that I want to work in my shop, I don't want to go and pray Jum'ah today because I want to make some money. Someone said, subhanAllah, I've heard this, wallahi I've heard this in a talk, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Whoever doesn't rule by the rule of Allah, then indeed he's from the kafirin, he's from the kuffar. So this man has made himself a judge in this matter, and now he's a kafir for doing that. Ajib, subhanAllah. You might think this is definitely one extreme. This is definitely one extreme. But we are also falling into this. Okay, we are sloganeering concepts in our religion which have far more vast and extensive meanings and concepts behind them. Whether it be related to the concept of hukum bima anzal Allah, ruling by what Allah has revealed. Okay, many of us have a very narrow way of looking at what that actually means, such that we think it only applies to matters of leadership and political authority. When it comes to the issue of khilafah, when it comes to the issue of unity, when it comes to the issue of, so many things. So many things. Okay, so for example, hurriya, for example, this idea of freedom. We can say, yes, we can say it comes from democracy and it's all haram and what have you. But there are aspects in our religion where we are free. There are aspects in our religion that we are free. Even when, subhanAllah, if you look at the Quran speaks about tahreer, freeing, not just freeing slaves, but when the wife of Imran, she made the oath to Allah, that I have made a vow to make these features in my stomach, what? Muharrara, to be freed and liberated. And this refers to what? It refers to a practice that Banu Israel used to do, where they used to when they give birth to a child, they would dedicate that child to the service of the church or the monastery for their entire life. And they considered that to be a form of freedom. They considered that to be a form of freedom. You think, how is that freedom? That's enslavement. But Ibn Arabi, he said, no, this is true freedom. Because you're freeing him min ad-dunya wa ashghaliha. You're freeing this child from the dunya and from all the worldly things that distract people. We need to have certain types of freedom in our religion. The Prophet said, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu." Whoever sees a munkar, you must change it. How can you change that munkar if you don't have the ability and the freedom to do so? There are concepts in our religion. There are aspects of freedom which completely go against Islam. For example, the freedom to leave Islam. If a person wants to do it, he can do it, but he has to face the consequences of that. He has to face the consequences of that in the dunya and the akhirah. Okay, but anyway, I sort of digress there. But the point being is that sloganeering, you have to be very, very careful. It makes our minds very, very narrow, and it's better that when it comes to working for the ummah, that we try to have a more complete, holistic understanding of these matters. Don't restrict matters to just to shouting and sloganeering. That only makes problems worse, and it only adds to the confusion of the Muslim ummah. And I honestly believe, after many years of reflection, I believe one of the common reasons why we find a lot of confusion in the shabab in terms of concepts related to hakimiyya and tahakum and these issues is pure sloganeering. And recently on Facebook I've been seeing this everyone's debating about this issue of at-tahakum ila al-mahakim, the going to a kafir court system to demand your right. Okay, I've seen a lot of people debating about that, and he said, "Ajib, people are debating this issue." Okay, but people say, no. If you go to, for example, someone stole some money from you, and the only way you can get it back is if you go to a judge or a court system, and you say, "I want my money back. I want this person to be punished or to be imprisoned because he's stealing and causing too many problems." Some people say, if you do that, you've committed shirk. Shirk, ajib. Why do people come? Obviously, it's not the time and place to discuss why this understanding is wrong. But why do people have these understandings, these new and very strange understandings? It's because of sloganeering, a lack of knowledge of the details of these matters. Anyhow, we will end there, inshallah. I hope that hasn't made us, forget what we've learned today, inshallah. But again, this is a surah that deserves great reflection. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq to act upon it, inshallah. That we will end, inshallah. Before I end, there are some very beneficial booklets that you can take here. They call it The Key to a Successful Day. These are small booklets of dua and dhikr. like Hisn Muslim, but they mention some fawaid. Okay, so feel free, I'll leave them at the desk here, inshallah. Maybe I'll leave some for the sisters. If someone can come and I can go and give them to the sisters, inshallah. Feel free to take them. If there are any questions, feel free to ask questions.
Regarding the last ayah of the surah, is there anything that we should say after reading Bala?
Yes. There is athar of some of the Sahaba when they would, after hearing the verse or reciting the verse, أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ, they used to say Bala. This is reported on Ali radiallahu anhu. He used to say this, Bala. وَأَنَا كَذَلِكَ مِنَ الشَّاهِدِينَ, and I am from the shahidin, those who bear witness to that. You can say that after listening to the ayah or after reciting the ayah, but don't do it in your obligatory prayers. Okay, if you want to do it in your recommended prayers, such as Taraweeh or what have you, you can do that. Don't disturb the jama'ah that you are praying in by saying it out loud. Okay, that can disturb the people that are praying. Okay, if you want to say it quietly to yourself, if it's a recommended prayer like Taraweeh, as I mentioned, you can do that as well, inshallah.